your success in this hobby is predicated on your commitment and dedication to it, and you've got to put the time in. But if you're willing to do that, the reward of FPV is so awesome. And whatever you think it feels like to fly at a high level, like, trust me, as someone who's like finally gotten there, it's 1,000 times better than whatever you think it is. It's literally like an out-of-body experience. You know, you can free your mind and you can just fly through the environment, and it's absolutely amazing, and it's worth the commitment. Like, just keep going, keep doing it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to RC with Adam. My name is Adam. You may have heard of the new book in FPV called FPV Flight Dynamics, Mastering Acro Mode on High Performance Drones. And if you haven't heard of it, you just did, so you're in the right place. But joining me today, we have a very special guest, is the author of this book, Christian Mollica. Did I say that right, Mollica?
It's Mollica.
Mollica, excuse me.
Yeah.
And
No,
today we have
one.
Christian Mollica with us. Thanks for being on, Christian. So good to have you with us.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, so first of all, we can cover. We'll get more into like specific topics, because this book is filled with very like detailed topics. It's great. I have so many questions, and we'll try to cover as much as we can during the time that we have. But first of all, just what is this book? Just tell somebody who maybe hasn't heard of this book before, or they're not sure like what they're going to get out of this book. Tell them about the book and what they can expect to get out of it.
The book is, oh God, here's my like 5-second elevator pitch condensed down into a minute. The book is basically, I mean, it's essentially an all-encompassing manual that covers pretty much every topic in FPV. I don't know how much you've read of it yet, but if there's anything I left out, please let me know. But I think the people who would get the most value out of it are definitely going to be beginner and intermediates, because it's really going to kind of take them by the hand and walk them through FPV from like A to Z, and it's going to get you on the fast track to building your skills as quickly as possible in the least amount of time, least amount of money and frustration. But I also really wanted to write it in such a way where it wouldn't be typecasted as just a book for the newbies. So there's a lot of really in-depth material on like advanced concepts associated with acro. So to keep it simple, like, I wanted to get the beginners in the hobby up to speed as quickly as possible, but also I wanted to create something that advanced and master level pilots would be able to read, and essentially, you know, give them something to talk about, I guess, in a sense. I wanted to talk about concepts in the book and offer terminology to other pilots so that they would be able to, you know, kind of communicate increasingly complex ideas to one another.
Yeah, and I think you did a great job of that.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, because I gotta tell you guys, like, I was just kind of blown away. I know it sounds like I'm kind of like hyping it up, and I mean, I'm not. I'm just really like impressed with this book, because, and I'll throw in some clips of it and more kind of some snapshots of it here for the viewers. But because it's just like the diagrams and the topics covered, and also like the language that you use, and either language taken from other aspects of flight, or kind of that you, I guess, kind of sort of made up, or sort of
just
applied to this.
Yeah,
you sort of coined it for this. I just found really impressive. So
Thanks, man.
That's pretty cool. And yeah, I would say it does, like, the first, what would you say, like the first quarter or third of the book is a lot of like beginner, kind of walking people into the hobby, that sort of thing.
Right.
And but then you do get more like advanced. You get into different or not even just tricks, though. That's what I think is so interesting about this book is you don't just get into like tricks. You get into like the very like fundamentals of flight. So like aerodynamics, but then like what you have to do with the stick positions, like, and just in ways that I would never have thought to like explain it. So yeah, so basically, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, yeah, and so in that regard, I almost wanted to, my goal with it was to see if I could like deconstruct FPV flight into its most indivisible units, so to speak, and then sort of rebuild it into some sort of logical hierarchy. And then with each one of those pieces, whatever it may be, a particular concept or a particular technique that we have to use while we're flying Acro. I wanted to shine a big old spotlight on it, kind of walk the reader through what this is. But I wanted to write about those things in a kind of thought-provoking way. So as opposed to just like talking at the reader and telling them like, hey, this is what you should do, I wanted to kind of just present it and be like, hey, here's a concept. This is why it's important. Let's kind of like look at it from all angles. I'll give you my opinion on it, but then ultimately I'm going to kind of like hand it over to you, and I want to be able to empower you to, think about it and figure out how you want to implement it into, your flying and your practice regimen. So yeah, that was kind of the goal with that. So I hope that I've succeeded in doing it. But
yeah, I mean, I would definitely say so, and that's one of the things that that is really cool about this book. I'm probably going to say that a lot, but anyway, that's one of the things that stuck out to me about this book was that it does it does get you thinking about like what you're actually doing when you're flying, and that's why I like it, because I feel like for me personally, I've been kind of getting to a point where like, I'm getting pretty good at flying around, but it's harder to like I need a little bit more structure and a little bit more like thinking about what I'm doing to start improving and getting more consistent. And that's what's cool about this book, because it sort of brings up things that I wouldn't think of. So instead of just being like, I'm just flying around, like not really thinking about it at all, you're kind of like, oh yeah, it's like that thing from the book where, when you like do a knife edge around a tree or whatever, and like I'm moving the sticks like this. So it's definitely not like, it's not like you have to read this whole book before you can ever fly or something, but it definitely has something there for more advanced pilots that you can like just kind of think, oh, like what am I actually doing? And get that kind of going in your brain, which is really cool. I
mean, for me, this is all stuff too that like, I didn't know any of this stuff really until I actually sat down and started writing the book, to be honest with you. So like I wrote in the book's preface, like I approached this project with some serious hubris. I thought I was a way better pilot than I actually was when I started, and I thought I knew more than I really did. And I was kind of like, I don't know, this could be easy. Like I've been in the game for like 5 years now. I can put something together that's going to help people. And then it was only until I started diving into it that I would suddenly realize like, oh, this actually doesn't work the way that I thought it did. And then I would have to sit there for hours in the simulator just recording myself flying or watching other pilots do it and sort of like break it down for it to make sense to me. So, I mean, writing this thing was like a learning process for me as well. And I mean, it's made me an infinitely better pilot just having gone through that process. But like, trust me, I'm not out here trying to be anybody's FPV guru and say like I'm the master of Acro and like I know it all, because I had no idea either. It was only when I had to like try and figure them out and then explain it to other people that it started to make sense to me. And that's kind of where all the material for the book came from. It was just sort of that process of experimentation and trial and error.
Yeah, that's so cool. And for me, as somebody who enjoys teaching people and all that with my videos, like, yeah, I can totally relate to that. Where you think you know what you're doing and you're like, okay, I'll just teach somebody else how to do it. And then you're like, wait a minute, I have to actually like figure out what it is that I'm doing.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Then you can actually teach it. And then you might realize that you weren't even like doing the right thing in the first place, so you end up getting better from that. But yeah, like, so tell me about that process of, well, like, so like, first of all, why did you, what made you want to write this book? Like to what made you think like, oh, I should like learn about all these things and teach and write about it?
Well, I mean, the teaching thing's a really important aspect. Actually, in my previous career, I was in like white collar sales for many years. I'm a certified sommelier, and I have a bunch of accreditations in the wine industry. So I was kind of like a corporate trainer, and I did. I developed like curriculum and did seminars and presentations to teach salespeople about wine and also to get them through certain wine certifications. I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary Somm, where the guys are going through like the Court of Master Sommeliers course, but that was like something that I was doing. Anyway, So I already had that kind of background. So I was already like well versed in taking tests and reading textbooks and, you know, developing curriculum and trying to break complex concepts down for people and teach it to them. So in a way, the book was almost just like, I don't know, can I apply that same sort of methodology to FPV and, you know, create something that's going to be helpful for people. But the book itself was actually not my original driving goal. What I wanted, what I was actually doing, if you rewind like 2 years ago, basically what I was trying to do was to found a hardware startup, and the name of that company was going to be Vespula. So I had developed all these branded elements for the company, and basically 5-second elevator pitch for Vespula, it was supposed to be like the Alienware of FPV, right? So actually on the cover, the drone that you see on the cover, this is it's a 3D rendering. It's not a real picture, obviously, or maybe not so obviously for some people, but it's actually a real 5-inch original quadcopter frame that I designed basically from the ground up in Fusion 360. So this is kind of what got me to learn how to do parametric modeling, and this is kind of what got me into 3D. And if anyone out there is interested in like learning how to get into, you know, 3D modeling, I highly recommend like trying to do a frame, because it's pretty complicated. There's so many like moving parts to it, and you have to model everything sort of in isolation, but also make sure that it like all comes together at the same time. So it's a pretty challenging project, but it will definitely teach you like how to model. So anyway, I already had this, you know, these assets. I already had like branded elements. You know, for instance, I got a bunch of props over here. I'm like Carrot Top right now, but this is like sort of the box that I had sent out copies to, you know, influencers in the community. So I mean, but this was already like, you know, assets that I had developed for the, you know, the company itself. This was supposed to be part of like the unboxing experience when you would get your quadcopter kit. So anyway, long story long, I was trying to, you know, found this company. I actually pitched it to a couple of people in the industry. I won't name drop, but I mean, you would know who these people are. I had really no business being in the same room with them, so they were actually really kind and generous to like offer me their time. But basically, they were like, "Hey, you sound like a really smart guy, and you've got great ideas, but do you have $5 million?" You know, and I'm like, "I don't." So they're like, "Okay, well, maybe you want to try and do something like a little more in your wheelhouse." And so I don't know, I kind of like pivoted, I guess you could say, into turning everything that I already had into a book. And I had already started developing some stuff for what was going to be like a supplemental, almost like, you know, like a video game manual that I wanted to include in the box with the quadcopter kit. And it was just going to have like, you know, cool 3D artwork, and it was going to just kind of like teach you like basics of flying. It was more just to be sort of like a branded element, you know, along that customer journey, so to speak, to sort of just like reinforce the brand. And it was just going to be something that was cool. So it was, you know, I already had these things developed, and I already had some material like with specific tricks and like, you know, how to move the sticks and stuff. So anyway, again, long story long, all of this stuff were things that I already had. And then I kind of decided, like, all right, I don't know, I'm Vespula now, and we're going to turn this, you know, this little manual into a full-fledged book. That was the thought process, and I thought that I would have been done with it in a matter of a couple months, but it actually took 12 months of full-time work to get it into its completed published form. So I guess you could say I just like stumbled into it and kept stumbling forward.
I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, you know, everybody's just stumbling around anyway. So it's just a matter of stumbling into something good, I guess.
Hopefully more forward than back, and that's what
exactly
is, I guess.
Exactly. Man, that's so cool. So you so as far as the all right, let's see. So let's back up just a little bit. So tell us about how you actually got into FPV. Like what's your FPV story? Because everybody's got an FPV story. Like what was that for you? Like when you were like, oh man, this is what I got to do.
So for me, I got into FPV kind of like, I guess you could say right around in its infancy in late 2014, early 2015-ish, and this is when like the original Rotor Riot crew was kind of putting stuff out. So I totally idolize guys, like Steele and Chad Nowak and Tommy. I used to watch their videos like ad nauseum when they released them, because back at that point there was like no content that was available. Sharpoo's like what the hell was it? Through the Gap or something, really like famous old school FPV video. I must have watched it like dozens and dozens of times. There was just no content back then, so I just watched it. Now it's great because YouTube is just inundated with content. You can find hours and hours and hours of just infinite. But my first drone was actually just like a little Blade Nano, because I was living in the middle of Manhattan at the time. So like on the short list of like worst places in the world to live, like to pick up FPV, like I was definitely in it. Like I literally lived on the same block as the Empire State Building. So there's like nowhere within miles to go fly a quad. So actually I just had like a little Blade Nano, and I would sit in my little shoebox apartment and just kind of like do laps around the room. So I mean, I was kind of in the hobby, I guess you could say, at that point, and I had, some drones, and I flew like on the weekends when I would go home to like Connecticut or something. But I would say that like I didn't actually really start to fly until probably about 2017, and that's kind of when I picked up like simulated racing in particular. And then I also moved out to Los Angeles, and there's tons of spots to go fly out there. So that's when things like really kicked off for me.
Did you go straight into like full like racing or freestyle type like 5-inch quads?
Yeah, I jumped pretty much straight into the 5-inch quads, because I knew that that's what I wanted to do. It wasn't actually like until much later in my like FPV journey where I started experimenting with the smaller ones. I actually really like flying like toothpicks and tiny whoops now, but like I was pretty much always on 5-inchers.
Yeah, that's cool, man. It's so funny. Like it seems like every single person starts out with like a tiny little micro quad, just like flying around their house, and they're just like, and then it just goes from there.
And then you get sucked in. You're totally addicted
exactly.
To it,
exactly. You totally get sucked in. I mean, for me, it was like the same kind of experience. I remember I was in class one time. We were just, how like for some reason you just start watching random YouTube videos in class. I don't know why. Yeah. And this was in I think like 2015 or something like that. And anyway, I remember watching a video of like probably it was like maybe Schizo and like Sharpoo, and I'm not sure who else. And they were flying around these like abandoned buildings in like Madrid or something. And I was like, I want to do that. That is what I'm gonna do. But it wasn't until like years later that I was ever like even close to being able to do that. But but that's what happens. You get sucked in, and then like eventually it will happen. And so in your case, do you do this full time now? Is this your like your full time gig?
Yeah, I mean, so I really wasn't happy, I guess, with my corporate position previously, and I was just like, I don't know, not to say I had like a quarter life crisis or anything, but I was like, I'm just really not happy with what I'm doing, and I feel like I could do something else. And that's when I decided I wanted to try and found the company, and then ultimately like pivoted into writing the book. So I mean, this has been my full-time venture really for the past 18 months, and as of right now, I mean, basically my full-time job is essentially marketing and promoting the book. There's a couple of other projects that I've got on the back burner, so to speak, but I mean, really what I'm trying to do is kind of get awareness of the book out there, because it was a massive investment of time and of money to create it. So I got to try and like generate as much awareness of it as possible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why I'm having you on, because when I first heard about the book, I think I kind of just stumbled across it.
Yeah, where'd you find it, by the way? I have to see it.
It was Into FPV, or the forums, or the website. I can't remember.
Oh yeah.
It was like the Into FPV forums. Yeah. I think is what it was. I don't really go in the forums that much, but somehow I don't remember how, but I came across it, and then they were like, "Oh, this new book is out," and I'm kind of thinking like, FPV Flight Dynamics, mastering Acro Mode. Like, I don't know, maybe it's good. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh dang, like this is a thing. And then when it showed up, like this thing is like huge. Like this is a freaking textbook, is what this is. And so, and that's what's really cool. I mean, that's why I got excited about it, because I'm looking forward to using this to help me to teach people through my videos, but then also, helping other people I think this could be a big help for other people that want a more structured way of learning FPV, because
Right.
I'm a pretty unstructured guy, I would say, but I know not everybody's like that. Some people want to know like exactly like what it is they're supposed to do to make a trick happen.
Right.
And that's what's so cool is you actually like, go through that. So,
Right.
but anyway, so that's why I'm having you on here, because I almost didn't even hear about this thing. Although now I guess it's getting picked up some other places. I think I saw it on the Rotor Riot store. Speaking of that, what is a good place for people to buy this? And we'll have a link to that in the description of this video.
So right now, it was up on Amazon. I self-published it through Amazon's like KDP service. But as you said, Rotor Riot just picked it up. Drew Camden was a big supporter of the book, and I asked him, I was like, would you mind carrying it in the store? And he was like, yeah. And quite honestly, I can think of like no bigger compliment than to have someone like of his ilk say like, yeah, the book's good, but also to like put his money where his mouth is and say like, this is a great product that we would like to carry on our store. So I was like totally elated with that. With that partnership. So I sent in some copies. Actually, they just landed in their store yesterday. We're recording this on Wednesday morning. So actually, yeah, they came in on Monday. They released a little flyer about it, and it basically sold out overnight. So I need to get a reorder out to them as quickly as possible. But anyway, so it's going to be available.
That's great.
It's
Congratulations.
available on
Yeah.
At this point, I also have worked out some partnerships with Get FPV and Race Day Quad, so they're going to be carrying the book as well, hopefully within the next week or two. It's just I have an order with the printer being created, but so it'll be available in all the major stores and up on Amazon.
Yeah,
so it's very exciting,
excellent.
Especially to be able to work with like other entrepreneurs in the industry, because quite frankly, I'm not like super happy with the experience of like publishing it through Amazon. And I've had a lot of people like complain about the price. They're like, it's $49.99 for a book, like a paperback book at that. Like, I don't want to pay that. And I totally understand that. And I mean, to that point, I would just tell people like, but trust me, I wish I was lying, but Amazon takes the overwhelming majority of that sticker price. It's just really expensive to print, an 8.5 by 11 full color interior like textbook of this size, and they just charge an arm and a leg to indie authors to put it up on their site. But
I mean, I'll tell you what though, like I mean, really, even if it was a $50 book, like it's totally worth the $50. Like I mean, preferably more of that would actually go to you, but I think
preferably, but doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, but I think as far as like people putting out their money, because I mean, that's like what, a couple batteries, I guess, batteries worth.
Yeah.
So if you want to,
yeah, exactly. You think about it in those terms. I mean, I don't know, not to make light of it, but it's like, listen, man, if you're worried about $50, this might not be the hobby for you.
Yeah.
I literally talk about it in the third chapter. I'm like, listen, let's like real talk right now. It's probably going to cost you anywhere between like $5,000 and $10,000 to like get to certain levels in this hobby. So like expect to shell out some serious cash. You're going to crash a lot. You're going to have to repair.
And I mean, you probably, if you do pick up this book, you'll probably actually save hundreds of dollars and hours by reading this book. So
I would hope. I mean, obviously,
I would say it'll pay for itself.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was the idea. I'm biased because I'm the guy that wrote it, but I mean, again, like I said, like I wrote in the preface, like I basically wrote the book that I wish I had when I picked up FPV for the first time, because I genuinely do believe that it would have helped me, massively to just shortcut a lot of the pitfalls that I had gone through, all of that painful trial and error, expensive trial and error. If somebody had just sat me down and was like, hey, listen, dude, I've been through it. Like, this is what I think you should do. This is why I think you should do it. And, follow this and you're going to get where you want to go a lot faster. Trust me. You can be the lucky beneficiary of my many thousands of dollars and thousands of hours of painful trial and error. Just here, let me streamline it for you. Do this, not that,
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and that's one of the things I appreciate about the book is you don't say like, oh, this is super fun and it's super easy, because that's what all of like that's what all of like the people that are selling like quads and stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with saying that per se, but the the people selling quads are like, yeah, you just plug it in and then you're an amazing pilot. But you're like, and I like how you sort of make the parallel of like it's basically learning an instrument. And and if you think about it like that, it's like, yeah, you wouldn't, like, why would a guitar teacher be like, here, play the guitar, it's super easy.
Just do these 3 nifty tricks. Like I hate that like superficial crap, and I always have. I've picked up a lot of hobbies in my life, and it always kind of like followed this repeating pattern where I would get like super deep into it, and then I would kind of get bored of it and just like, be done with it. So I've got like a whole garage full of like, this is like the land where my hobbies go to die, But I would always like, for each one of those things, I would always look for like materials, and I was like, why can't someone just like give it to me straight without like the marketing BS? Like, listen, I'm committed, I'm devoted, I'll put the time in, just like tell me what I need to do. You don't have to like try and sell me on like some ridiculous system. So I've always hated superficiality and like mediocrity in that sense. So like with the book, like I really wanted to drill down. And I mean, the subtitle is Mastering Acro Mode, and it's not like something that I take lightly. I really intend to like over deliver on that promise. Like, you will get everything that you need to literally master the instrument of the quadcopter. But yeah, I just never liked that sort of superficial stuff. And I write that in the book's introduction too. I'm like, listen, who is this book not for? Like, literally it says, who's this book not for? And it's like, listen, if you think that, there's anything out there that's going to let you circumvent all of this, time and dedication, then you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Like, I can help you and I can help make this process quicker and more efficient, but ultimately your success in this hobby is predicated on your commitment and dedication to it, and you've got to put the time in. But if you're willing to do that, the reward of FPV is so awesome. And whatever you think it feels like to fly at a high level, like, trust me, as someone who's like finally gotten there, it's 1,000 times better than whatever you think it is. It's literally like an out-of-body experience. You can free your mind and you can just fly through the environment, and it's absolutely amazing, and it's worth the commitment. Like, just keep going, keep doing it. And I wanted to be able to like, motivate people to keep going, because to me it feels like it was one of the few hobbies that I actually like really put in the work to get somewhere with, and I didn't just like quit when the going got tough, and now I'm like reaping the benefits of that, and I feel good about where I am, and I love to fly, and I'm just so happy that I actually stuck with it. So, to be able to help other people to get there and to experience the joy of FPV flight, I mean, that's really something that's truly fulfilling to me, and I genuinely hope that it does help people get to where they want to be. So,
yeah, no, I could not agree more with that, because and that's the thing. It is like, it's super worth the effort, even though it's like there's a lot of effort, and that can be. I mean, obviously you have that in, stages, like when you're first starting off, like you learn to like hover, or you learn to just do anything to control the quad, and that's rewarding. Right. But like, right. it only goes up from there, but also the effort goes up from there as well. But yeah, it's totally worth it. Like, it's just to be able to just make the quad do whatever you want it to do is like, it's the coolest thing. It's the coolest thing ever.
It's so totally mind blowing. It's a video game, I mean, basically.
Yeah.
Like, you think about what is a video game? Well, you hold some sort of input device, a controller, and you press buttons and you move joysticks, and it manipulates an image on a screen, right? And what is the essence of the FPV experience? Well, you hold a controller, you move 2 joysticks, and it manipulates an image on a screen.
Yeah.
But the only difference is that in FPV, you're actually like moving a physical object fluidly through 3-dimensional space with your mind. It's totally mind-blowing experience.
It totally is. Like, and a lot of people they see the FPV goggles and they think like VR goggles, and so they're like, oh, are those VR goggles? And I'm like, well, actually they're just
it's real
goggles.
Virtuality.
They're just reality goggles,
right?
Is what they are. If so that's super cool. But yeah, and speaking about talking about manipulating the quad to do stuff, what are some of your favorite like topics that you cover in the book? And it could be any of them, as far as like the theory or the actual skills. What are some that you had the most fun learning about and writing?
I think well, there was a couple of concepts in particular that I was like really interested in sort of fleshing out. One of them is this one's kind of complex, but it's called what I documented as the cyclic dial effect, which is basically the interaction that your cyclic inputs, so the combination of pitch and roll on a mode 2 configuration on the right stick, this is what I call in the book as the cyclic stick, or just cyclic for short. It's the effect that the yaw command has on the pitch and roll inputs, and sort of how it manipulates your cyclic command orientation over the face of the gimbal, and then ultimately like what it means sort of on a basic level. So for beginners, it has important implications on, you know, just doing basic things like coordinated turning, for instance, but then at a much advanced and master level, you can sort of manipulate the quadcopter's orientation by rotating this cyclic dial to sort of, you know, like kick the quad's tail out and then sort of move through what I call the outside stance, and then perform like sidewinding maneuvers. And this is a technique that's used quite liberally with like advanced cinematic. For instance, if they're chasing mobile subjects or something, you'll always see this where they sort of like start trailing behind a subject, like a drift car or a downhill skier or something. So they'll kind of like kick the quad out and they'll start like pushing it to the side like this while keeping the subject, you know, in the frame. So in that respect, you know, since we're operating a mini quad that doesn't have, you know, a 3-axis gimbal, we can't just like strafe to the side and then just sort of like, you know, pan the camera to look at it while we're moving parallel. We have to like actually move the quadcopter's frame to keep that subject in frame while we're pushing it downrange. Yeah, that was actually kind of an exciting, I guess, discovery, you could say, that I just sort of stumbled into. Again, it was one of those things where I was trying to like work out in my head, and I realized like, oh, I think this is actually pretty important, and it has some major implications to acro flying. I'm going to document it, so I did.
Yeah. And so in just because, you know, I'm a pretty simple guy. So in simple terms, would you say that is essentially like the effect that the yaw input has on your quad while you are flying? Like, I mean, that's what it mostly has to do with.
Yeah. So like, how can I, here, I got one of my beater quads over here. So like, basically it was, what I talked about in the book was sort of like the difference between absolute and relative orientations of the quadcopter. So it kind of goes back to the notion that because you know, for all intents and purposes, the quadcopter is an aerodynamically symmetrical machine, right? So if it's angled forward like this and it's moving forward, it's going to behave exactly the same way, whether it's in this orientation, this, or this, so long as its attitude, which I defined as, you know, the quadcopter's holistic rotor disc relative to the ground plane, the angle at which it's you know, angled forward. So long as that remains the same, it doesn't really matter what position this is in. The quadcopter is always going to go in that direction. But the fundamental shift in perspective, so to speak, is A, like our visual vantage through the FPV camera, and then B, also the cyclic command orientation on the right gimbal, right? So if you imagine like the example that I use in the book is like if the quadcopter is moving downrange like this in what I called the baseline position, if you wanted to accelerate forward, you would have to pitch forward and then throttle up, right? So that way you would move forward. You would apply a greater proportion of your total power output to forward thrust so that the quadcopter would accelerate downrange. Now, what would happen if we were to yaw the quadcopter like to the left? Okay, so now it's in the same attitudinal position. It maintains the same absolute orientation, but its relative orientation has now shifted within that absolute orientation. So again, aerodynamically, the quadcopter doesn't care. It's still going to do the exact same thing it's doing, even if it was like at this. But now we're looking at a different perspective while doing the same thing. So as FPV pilots, it's important for us to recognize the fact that, you know, we're observing the same thing just from a different perspective, but then also it's shifting the relative meaning of our pitch and roll inputs on the cyclic gimbal. So to tie that up, the point is that if you wanted this quadcopter to accelerate forward, you would actually have to push the stick. You would have to apply forward pitch, and in this case, right roll while throttling up to execute the same thing. So like in the absolute sense, the quadcopter continues moving down range at the same heading, elevation, and speed, but you have to sort of account for the shift in perspective, the absolute versus the relative orientation, if that makes sense. The book probably explains it a hell of a lot better because there's pictures and stuff.
well, and it's no, I mean that does make sense, and I think it's really it's such a complicated topic, especially to be able to communicate effectively, between pilots, like, and that's what I like, is that you took a concept like that I think probably most people that maybe they've just been like self-taught, or they're just they've learned how to fly. Yeah. They probably do that without even thinking about it.
Absolutely.
And because honestly, I never really like thought about it quite like that.
Either did I.
And until reading that, and I'm like, oh, so I would say, like, if you haven't flown much, you might be like, what the heck is he talking about? Like, what? Like, I don't understand that. But intuitively, you just kind of do it. But so that's cool that you kind of gave it like the language and the sort of like the names to that, so that we can kind of communicate, like, using the same terms and that
right.
that sort of thing. So,
right.
And yeah, that's like a super, that's a really big thing, actually, that I was thinking about when I read that. I was like, oh, this is a pretty good way of explaining, or a more, I guess, organized way of explaining to people when they're first learning how to fly, that if you're trying to fly and you are heading towards a tree and you just yaw, you're still going to hit the tree. Yeah, right. Because that's what a lot of people do. I mean, I know I did that a lot, because I was like, what does this stick do? And you're like, but I'm pointing over there, so why aren't I moving over there? So
yeah,
that's super interesting.
The angle of the horizon too in the goggles, so it creates the illusion that the yaw command is doing things that it's really not.
Yeah.
And that's I write about that in chapter 9, yaw, the shifter of perspectives, and I say, like, I start off by saying, like, yaw is the most misunderstood input in FPV. It makes people think that it's doing things that it's really not. It's not really ever. It does not have the power on its own to alter the quadcopter's trajectory, because it's not actually manipulating anything about the quad's thrust vector, right? Only pitch and roll can manipulate its orientation like this. The yaw command is just rotating it about its local vertical axis, which again does absolutely nothing to alter the quadcopter's flight path or trajectory, because it's not actually, changing the heading of your quad's thrust vector. So, in the goggles, you give, like you said, you're going towards a tree. If you give a yaw input, all that's happening is you're going towards the tree. Now you're going like this. Now you're still going towards the tree, but you're just looking off over there.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, exactly.
That's super confusing for new people to figure out. And then on top of it, like I was talking about with the cyclic dial effect, what it does is it has the effect of now altering what your pitch and roll inputs on the right stick actually mean. So now if you get yourself all cockeyed like that and you're going towards that tree, you're going to start spazzing out on the sticks, because you don't realize that, okay, the appropriate correction is actually to kind of like, move it like this, but you're going to spaz out and you're going to do something totally different. And that's a really important concept for people to be able to get early on.
Yeah. And would you say that yaw is probably the biggest control that gets people into trouble, like in terms of like getting disoriented when you're trying to learn how to fly? Is messing around with the yaw?
In terms of disorientation, yaw is definitely that. Because also, like, as I talk about, like in the book, like when you're inputting left and right yaw, it causes the horizon to shift in the opposite direction of what roll does, So in this case, if you have the quadcopter like this, if you were to give like a left roll input, right? So the quadcopter is going to roll like this. It's that the frame is actually going to physically move, and now you're going to bank into the turn, and the horizon is going to shift in a way that feels intuitive and natural, right? But now if you were to issue a left yaw command, the quadcopter actually rotates like this. right? So its attitudinal orientation doesn't change. Its flight path doesn't change. All you've done is now shifted your visual vantage on the camera, and you'll notice that it's in the opposite direction. So roll is going to go like this. It's going to make the horizon go up like that. Yaw left is going to go like this, and it's going to make the horizon go like that. So it goes in the opposite direction, and that's really counterintuitive and confusing if you don't understand why that's happening, and then if you don't really fully comprehend the implications that it has on your flying. So like that's a really, really, really crucial concept for new pilots to really get down.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And it's funny because when I'm reading the book, that's what I have to do is I have to like pick up a quad and be like, okay, so it's going like that, and then it does that, and I have to just like go through it in slow motion, and it's really funny. Yeah, talking about turns, I think it's also interesting that you mentioned how yaw, how the order matters. So like you want to roll and then yaw instead of yaw and then roll. And so would you say, like just talking generally here, just as kind of like a blanket statement, would you say that yaw is essentially is sort of like the you're sort of accenting the other inputs, like yaw is just sort of like a thing that you use to correct other inputs, like so you use it after the other inputs and just like in general terms, like for normal type of flying? What would you say about that statement?
Yeah, in general terms, what does the yaw input do? The yaw input essentially, it does two things. It changes as I call it in the book, it's the shifter of perspectives, and in this case, perspective is a function of two things. So it means the visual vantage through the FPV camera. So when you input a yaw command, it's going to change the where you're looking essentially. But and then again, it's also going to change the relative meaning of the pitch and roll inputs. I know I keep saying that it's kind of difficult to describe as a visual, like what Adam is talking about here is in particular this segment in chapter 18 where I'm talking about coordinated turning and how input order matters. So basically like this is what the correct sequence of inputs should be when you're making a coordinated turn. And the reason for it is because that if you issue a yaw command first, all you're doing is sort of shifting the quadcopter's relative orientation. And then when you go to make that sort of, when you roll into the turn and then start pitching back in order to pull the quadcopter through the turn, what's actually happening is this sort of effect. So basically you mean to do one thing, but you have not fully compensated for the fact that you have altered the quadcopter's relative orientation, and what you think you're doing is actually not what you're doing. You're issuing a command that's a blatantly incorrect command because you haven't accounted for the fact that the quad is misaligned in its two orientations. Kind of tough to describe. But then also a couple pages after that is where this is one thing that I was actually kind of excited to sort of like stumble into and discover, and was really excited to kind of share in the book, was this the concept of like how the yaw command in concert with the cyclic stick affects turning radius, I guess, while you're making a coordinated turn. So obviously when you're in acro mode, as we all know, if you hold the cyclic stick in a deflected position away from its center origin point, you're constantly issuing a rotational command to the flight controller. So long as it stays deflected into one of the gimbal's quadrants, it's always going to want to continue rolling over. But now, as we know, when we're making a coordinated turn, we actually we push the cyclic stick away from the origin, we hold it there. And then by issuing a yaw command, we can actually just hold the sticks in a static position, right? And the quadcopter just continues to make a turn, but it does not rotate itself over. And I get, the question is there is like, well, why? The stick is in a deflected position. Why is the quadcopter not inverting? And it's basically because while you're continuing to issue that yaw command, you're basically telling the flight controller, like, okay, roll over, but yaw down. Roll over, but yaw down. Roll over, but yaw down. It's almost like, as a loose analogy, you can think of it as like sort of like the moon orbiting the Earth in a way. And in essence, it's a celestial body that has mass. It's attracted to the Earth through gravity. So in a sense, the moon is always falling towards the Earth, but it never actually makes contact with the Earth because it's in orbit and kind of just like always slips out. So it's the same kind of concept with that, where like when you're issuing a matching yaw input while you're turning, it's like the quadcopter wants to roll itself over, but you're constantly yawing the nose back down. So essentially it's doing, this. It's like roll yaw, roll yaw, roll yaw. And then based on the influence of that yaw command and, the cyclic command, you can essentially manipulate the radius of the turn. So you can sharpen the turn, or you can, make the turn larger. So, I wrote an entire 10-page chapter on something as seemingly simple as coordinated turning, which is really anything but.
Yeah, all right. And that's page 177 you're looking at?
Yeah, 177.
Talking about the coordinated turning. Yeah, and guys, just as another example, this is why I like this book so much, because there are so many diagrams and figures and graphics, and it really it still can make your brain hurt for sure, but it really helps like to visualize things instead of just sort of like it makes something that is abstract a little bit less abstract. And yeah, definitely, and yeah, you definitely like it, or for that specific example, that's a good way how you described it. Like what the way that I sort of thought about that was like, imagine if I'm holding a quadcopter and then I do a turn, but if I was just to use yaw, I would go forward, stop, yaw, go forward, stop, yaw, and then do it like that. But then the more smooth you get, you would do it like incrementally, but it just, the way that it works is just like in one fluid motion. So it's
right. Yeah, exactly.
Like, whoa, mind blown. It's amazing, man.
It takes a lot of time to sort of like break those things down. Like the seemingly innocuous details are what are really the most important things.
So I'm interested in I'm interested in like why would you do this? Why would you take the time to break down something like that? Is it like really interesting to you personally? Or are you like, do you have a background in like physics and like aerodynamics, or do you just want to like teach people how to do this, or what? I'm just curious, like, because it's impressive, like how much you broke down seemingly simple things.
Yeah, well, like I said, like it wasn't my intention to kind of like, if I were to go back like 12, 13 months and you were to just like put this into my hands, I would be like, what the hell is this and who created it? I would have been like, I didn't do this. This looks like a lot of work. There's no way I'm doing this, right?
Yeah.
So it was just, I just kind of kept chipping away at it and just kept, adding to it until eventually it turned into what it is. But as far as like, my educational background, I have a degree in like microeconomic theory. Like I'm not a physicist or an engineer. And, quite frankly, I'm not even really that interested in those topics. So like I talk about that stuff as much as is necessary in the book to sort of like deliver a technical point and to give certain background on a fundamental concept. But like, I don't know. I've had people ask me, like, oh, I want to use this as like, as a reference material for like my dissertation on, I'm like, dude, it's not that book. Like the words like Bernoulli's principle do not show up anywhere. I think I use the word like airfoil, like literally twice in the book. So it's not like that kind of in-depth technical thing. I don't know, as far as why I wrote the book, I don't know. It was kind of just like a driving obsession at some point, and I'm just kind of like really pedantic and have this obsessive need to like organize things, I guess you could say. So like, I don't know, this writing this book was kind of just like the perfect cross section of, I guess for me, someone who just has like that INTJ sort of like personality type that wants to just like dissect things and like reorganize it. I don't know, but hopefully it's helpful to people, because I genuinely, I love FPV. I feel really passionate about it, and if it's something that helps others, then it truly is like a fulfilling thing for me. And actually, on that note, like in in the book's preface, I write like, this book was a massive undertaking, but as cliche as it sounds, if even one person says to me one day, like, hey man, I read your book and you taught me how to fly, then it'll have been worth the effort. And so actually last night I like refreshed the Amazon page, and there was some guy who like left a really nice review on Amazon, and at the bottom of it he said, like, to the authors, like, hey man, I'm reading your book and you're teaching me how to fly. And I was like, I don't know, that was like a special moment for me. I was like, oh, that's nice. This guy's actually getting a lot out of it, and I'm able to make a connection with him, and I don't know, that felt good. So
yeah, that's I mean, that's cool, man. That is very cool. I'm really glad that you were able to actually get to the point of publishing this thing and getting through all those struggles of getting it together and making it happen. So, and I'm sure a lot of other people are happy about that as well. So
it was a massive undertaking. I estimate it took anywhere between like 2,000 to 2,500 hours over the past 12 months to do it. So I mean, the whole thing is like completely from me. Like, I wrote everything, I edited everything, I illustrated all of it, I formatted the entire thing for print, I published it. I had to figure out, how to get like an ISBN number, how to copyright it with the Library of Congress, like all this stuff that I had no idea about. I mean, I basically had to learn how to do, 3D rendering in Blender from scratch. I had to learn Adobe Illustrator. These are all things that I really didn't know. I learned as I went, and just kind of, like I said, just sort of kept stumbling forward, and masochistically just kind of kept throwing myself against this wall until eventually, like, at the end of it, like, I don't know, this thing came out. And it's pretty wild to me, because like you live in it for so long that, like, now that I've like finished it and published it, like I haven't even like really read it or picked it up or touched it. So like before we were getting on the call here, I actually was kind of like reading through some of it, and it's really weird from my perspective because it's almost like reading someone else's work.
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't create this. I don't even know where this thing came from,
Yeah. Well, I mean, shoot, that's what's so great. I mean, that's part of why I make video, or why I started making videos, because once you write it down, then you don't have to remember it anymore. So you've got this whole book of stuff that, like, if you forget something, you just go back to your book and
just go to the book, read the book.
Yeah, you can just learn from your own book, So that's, man, that is super cool. Just one more topic I want to touch on, and then we can jump off here. So what about, you talk about, I want to make sure I get this term right. You talk about
chapter 14 is called Reading the Screen. And it's basically like developing your visual technique as an FPV pilot, which is something that's just, incredibly important in your development in learning how to fly acro. It's like, as I open up that chapter talking about, like, as human beings, we live in a 3-dimensional world, right? But essentially we are like these terrestrial creatures that are shackled to a 2-dimensional plane. So our concept of, 3 dimensions is rather, rudimentary in that sense, where like you can pick up an object and rotate it and you can see that it has a length and a width and a height. But in terms of like moving fluidly through 3-dimensional space, that's not something that human beings have a whole lot of experience with, in the sense that a fish moves through water, or a bird moves through, the air. So in a sense, becoming an FPV pilot is really like this process of, like I talk about, unlocking the third dimension. So it's sort of like adding the Z-axis, so to speak, and learning how to really operate in 3 dimensions. And where I'm going with this is that it's really critically important to be able to read the information that is coming in, onto your screen, because in effect, it's just a 2-dimensional image. It's changing very rapidly. There's a lot of information that's coming at you. So developing your visual technique is really about sort of filtering out all the noise and sort of locking onto the signal. And this is a concept that they talk about in, fixed wing aviation. In aviation, you have to like sort of lock your focus onto something and use that as, your visual reference through whatever movement that you're doing to help gauge, your orientation and your vector through three-dimensional space. So this whole chapter basically just, dives into that, and it shows, like a lot of actual like photographs and images of like, real life flying, and sort of, calls out specific elements. So like what you should be looking at and when, and sort of how to reframe your perspective as an FPV pilot.
And so I'm curious about that. Did you kind of come up with these sort of, did you sort of think up the kind of the concept or how to explain the concept yourself, or did you kind of learn from some other pilots, just in terms of like for example, in your own flying, like did you start to incorporate these aspects like tracking objects and having like a primary object or a secondary object or like that type of thing, and then you kind of thought, oh, I should, like, this is what I'm doing, I should teach other people? Or did you kind of have to like actually like think about and figure out what it was that you were doing when you were flying?
In that regard, and I would say like the overwhelming majority of the material in the book is really like, I guess, original content. It's original thoughts. I mean, It's definitely spurred by just my own experience flying. And then also, obviously, like there's other pilots that do talk about these things as well. But I kind of wanted to like really run with them and like take them the distance and sort of like bring it to its logical conclusion, I guess. So like in terms of this particular chapter where we're talking about visual technique, it was one of those things that dawned on me that, as you become an advanced pilot, essentially what you're doing is you're almost like, your eyes are almost like locking on to different targets on the screen, and it's almost like you're monkey branching from like object to object. And what I discovered that like as I became a more proficient pilot, I was becoming more adept at figuring out like what is the most important thing for me to be focusing my attention on at this point, because when you're a beginner, you're kind of just bumbling around. You're in total awe of what's going on. You're looking around the screen. It's like, look at all the pretty colors. Everything's awesome. Yeah. But you're just like sort of haphazardly looking, and you're not really focused. Now, like when I fly through the environment, I'm like laser focused. I know exactly what to look at. I know exactly what I'm going to look at after that particular, object anchor, as I call it, has exited the screen, or a more relevant object anchor has, taken its place. If I've come into proximity with something that is closer. That's just a super important concept that I was like, I have to document. And I actually had a lot of fun writing that chapter because, I talked about it in kind of like, I don't know, in some ways, like in a very, I guess, ethereal, thought-provoking way. Like there's one section where I talk about like FPV death, like ego death, which is essentially like where while you're flying through the environment, you really have to be able to make that shift in perspective where like it's not about you, like where you are in three-dimensional space is always relative to the local objects that populate your surroundings, right? So it's really important for you not to focus on your intended flight path, right? You want to maintain peripheral awareness of your flight path, but you always want to have your eyes focused on an actual object in the environment. Right, so you're looking at the object as you rotate around it, but you're sort of just peripherally watching like where ultimately you want to go. Whereas for beginners, they tend to fly from a self-centered perspective where they're going to like, oh, I want to go there, so I'm going to look there. But they're not really looking at anything. They're not looking at the things that are changing on the screen that are actually, dictating the performance of that particular maneuver, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that kind of makes sense. It's such a, I mean, to be honest with you, and that's why I bring up this chapter so that other people can learn about that kind of concept, because I hadn't really thought about it at all. Like, I mean, I understand, like, no, I hadn't really thought about it at all. Like it was really like, I just kind of fly and I see where I'm going, but I never really considered how I get there or what to look at. So I'm excited to, that's what I like about this book, because it's getting me excited, because I'm excited to go out and the next time I fly, think a little bit more about like, okay, like what's my object that I'm looking at, like how am I gonna move around this 3D space and that sort of thing. So just a really cool concept and theory, and you have a lot of those in this book, but they're not just concepts and theories. So like you can actually like go out and do these things and practice them and like
put them into
practice. And test them, and to see if that's like true for you. Like, does this actually work better with this method.
And I mean, and in that regard too, like there's a lot of cases in the book where I say like, listen, like I don't expect you to do everything that I'm talking about. And furthermore, I don't even recommend that you do exactly what I'm talking about, exactly the way that I'm talking about it. Because at the end of the day, like you can't argue with success. You need to kind of develop your own technique and figure out what works for you. So I can sort of present this general concept and say like, this is important. I think you should do it kind of like this, but ultimately like that's going to be up to you to figure out. And it's really exciting for me to hear someone like you, who is an advanced pilot, read some of that material and kind of get excited about it and think more deeply about what it is that you're doing. Because like I said in the beginning, like that's part of the reason why I wrote the book. I didn't want this to be just like pigeonholed as like, this is a book for newbies. I wanted to kind of, write about important concepts that are not clearly defined in FPV right now and don't have any sort of universally recognized terminology, and sort of be able to offer that, as humbly as possible to the community as my contribution and say like, here, this stuff is important. And I think that the hobby has reached a level of maturity now where there are enough advanced level pilots where we can start diving into the minutia of acro. And if this book has any sort of, lasting effect and, on the community, whatever, if any of this terminology does end up like, seeping into, the FPV lexicon, so to speak, then I would just be happy in thinking that I had, potentially some part in pushing the conversation forward. If I can offer some language to pilots where they can actually start thinking more deeply about what it is that they're doing, and we can all kind of come together as a group and share that collective wisdom, that's something that's exciting to me. And it's one of those things where it's like, you and I can both look up at the sky and we can be like, okay, sky's blue, but like, is my blue your blue? That kind of thing. I think there's a whole world of nuance that's kind of just lurking beneath the surface in all of these things that we just intuitively do while we're flying acro, that we don't even necessarily understand why we're doing it, or haven't even questioned whether or not we're doing it the right way, or if there's other ways to do it. And I think that, in writing about these things, hopefully like something jumps out to pilots like, you or anyone else in the community where they're like, oh, this guy's talking about something. I always thought about it like this, and I'm not saying like, trust me, not everything I write in there is like gospel. This is not the FPV Bible, but if it can give people something to latch onto and it gives them, a jumping point to lead into other conversations, then that's awesome. I would just love to be able to see people, just talk more in depth about what they're doing and what they're thinking about and the experiences that they're having while they're flying. And then, in that respect, we can all just continue to come together and develop stronger bonds over this, thing that we're all crazy passionate about. So that's kind of why I wrote the thing.
Well, Christian, I think that this book will definitely do that. And I hope it catches on. I hope people learn more about it. Hopefully you learned about it today. And let's see what, before we jump off here, what's some good places for people to contact you? What's your, how can they find you or communicate with you or ask you to sign $1 million, book deals, etc.?
You can reach me at Christian@vespula.com. So VESPULA. If you want to send me an email, if anyone's interested in checking out my Instagram, I'm at Vespula FPV. I have a lot of like infographics on there that, it's a lot of like artwork from the book. So, I mean, if you want to get a taste of like what's in there, there's a lot of material on there. I'm going to start releasing some YouTube videos soon, but I'm not great on the YouTubes and the social medias. So like, that's a whole new learning process for me, but
yeah, well, you have been spending some time, writing a whole book. So that's,
so I'm playing catch up with like, all the other stuff.
And do you just a couple more questions before we jump off. Do you have videos of you actually flying? Because we don't even know if you can actually fly, really. I mean,
yeah, I know. At this point in time, no, actually I don't.
Okay.
And to be honest with you, like for me, I don't know, flying FPV was always one of those things that was like just kind of like a personal meditative experience for me.
Yeah.
And I never really like felt compelled to like really record it or like share it with other people. Like I love watching other people's videos. I get excited about it, but I'm not like huge into social media myself. So like I never really bothered with it. But now as somebody who just wrote a book on the topic, people want to know like, A, who the hell is this guy and can he actually fly a mini quad? So I'm working on like putting some freestyle videos together and some other stuff for YouTube, but
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And look, don't overstress it. Or don't overstress about it. Cause I mean, FPV, if there's the one good thing about FPV is everybody has their own style. So it's like, you just do your style. And I mean, toss up some, just some DVR footage or something on your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
I'm figuring
that.
Like Premiere Pro as I go.
Oh yeah. We'll see. And that's the other thing is like, once you actually get into like sharing FPV stuff, then it's like video editing, audio, sound, imaging, and so it can be that's like a whole that's your next book right there. Anyway, just 2 more questions just for fun before you leave. If you could only have one quad, what would it be?
Oh God, that's a tough question. Actually, I don't know. I'm kind of looking at my beater quad over here. Like I have a fleet of TBS Source 1s. Like I've been flying this one and just like I practice proxy on these all the time. Like I don't know, you just can't beat it for like $26. I mean, you can just beat the hell out of them and they just like keep on ticking. I actually really like the Source 1. It's kind of a tank. It doesn't have a whole lot of finesse, but I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
and then in terms of
like,
I
got right here. Boom. There's mine.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Right, and who is your current? We'll say current favorite FPV pilot.
Ladrib.
Same here. You like that flow style?
Yeah, I loves me some Drib.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he's a cool dude too, because I've been like talking with him back and forth about putting the book in Rotor Riot. But like, to be honest with you, like Drew's like one of my favorite pilots, and of all the people that I'm subscribed to on YouTube, like he's one of the few that I actually have like the little notification bell.
Yeah. Okay.
Clicked off on, And if I'm being totally honest, like one of my guilty pleasures in FPV is that like I love to hate Drew Camden's freestyle videos because he's just so damn good that it pisses me off.
He is. Yeah.
So like I load up that video the second it comes in. I'm like, all right, here, whatever, Drew, take the thumbs up before it even finishes like loading up. And then he's just like, he's doing his thing. It's like, oh, great intro, great music. And I'm just like sitting there just like annoyed. I start getting excited, man. When he comes out of a trick like a little wonky or he gets himself into like a little squirrely spot, dude, I start licking my chops. I'm like, oh, here we go. It's like a chink in the armor,
Finally,
like, show me that you are but a mortal man, Drew. And then like without fail, he just like, he's just like, oh, what, that little like 1 foot knife edge gap back there? I'm just going to do a little backflip, land on a soft cushion of air, do a little bunny hop, just keep cruising, like whatever, dude, I'm going with the flow. And I'm just like, damn it.
Exactly.
How is this guy so friggin' good? Pisses me off.
Yeah, I know. You just have to be like, okay, I'm going to be inspired and I'm not going to be filled with rage.
Yeah, actually, that's what I wrote to him when I sent them a copy in the book. I wrote, I was like, dear Drew, please stop dropping freestyle vids immediately because you're crushing my fragile ego. I thank you for your compliance.
Yeah, exactly, man.
He hasn't done it.
Gosh.
So obviously, he's not listening to me.
Yeah, I don't think he's gonna stop. And that's probably for the best, I suppose. So.
Yeah, no, it's good for all of us.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, I don't want to take any more of your time. Christian, thank you so much for spending time with me and my viewers here on RC with Adam. And everybody, go buy this book. Check out the links in the description if you want to get in contact with Christian and to buy this book. Christian, do you have anything else to say? And then we'll head out.
No, that's it, man. I really appreciate the time. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will see you again very soon.
Later, guys.